Hello, everyone. So last time we did a quick review of the various chemistry subdisciplines and disciplines. So hopefully you have an idea of what topics of chemistry you find interesting. So today we're going to be trying to talk about how you can take that idea and try and translate it into a career and what options you have available to you. And it turns out your options are going to be way more varied than you probably expected. So there's the traditional answer of what should you do when you leave undergrad, and that's do what most of your professors did and go to grad school because life's calling and you want to hit the snooze button. However, there's a lot more that you can do as a chemist than you'd expect. And so I went ahead and provided 3 of my favorite examples of chemists that you may know. So up at the center, we have our current Pope Francis, who turned out got his chemical associate's degree back in '55. So if you want to, you can take your chemical degree and go become Pope. Probably not most of your callings, but it's been done before. We also have Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of England, who got her Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from Oxford in '47. So yeah, she spent her war years at Oxford getting a chem degree and became Prime Minister of a country. And just in case you think that was an anomaly, it turns out Angela Merkel did it too. She got her BS in physical chemistry and a PhD in quantum chemistry and went on to become the Chancellor of Germany, the longest running chancellor in Germany ever. So it turns out you can actually do a lot more with a chem degree than you'd think. So let's go ahead and talk about maybe some of the more traditional paths in case you don't want to become a world leader. So the classic answer for what should you do after you get your bachelor's degree is say, go into education just like all of your professors and teachers did. So if you're done with schooling after your time at Truman, then your classic answer is go ahead and try and get a certification and become a primary or secondary teacher. So this often requires a more specialized degree, but you can go ahead and become essentially a elementary, middle school, or high school teacher. However, if you want to, you can go ahead and get a Master's of Education or a Master's of Science and pull in a little bit more money as a teacher by either teaching, again, mostly at the high school or potentially at the community college level. However, if you want to actually become like the rest of your instructors and teach at a 4-year institution, it's the PhD for you. Then your real question will be, do you want to teach at a school like Truman where you have smaller class sizes that hopefully aren't perpetually online? Or do you want to go ahead and teach at an R1 institution? So this is a place more like Mizzou that's a little bit more research focused, but also gives you a chance to teach, say, master's or graduate students. Alternatively, you could go ahead and go to an R1 institution and you can get more involved in research. So if you want to leave Truman and go straight into research because you've had enough time of classes, you're going to be focusing on a lot of lab technician work. So this means being given specific assignments that you're going to go out and do. So you're often not going to be the person managing a lab or more managing your time. It's going to be a lot more assignment oriented, but that often ends up being the right fit for many students. However, if it turns out that you like your independence, you might go ahead and consider a master's, at which point you can start getting into positions where you probably start as a research scientist. So you might be given small projects that you're put in charge of, or maybe even a lab manager in industry where you're being asked to, again, maybe control a small group, a couple lab technicians, and work on small projects. However, if you really want to have a lot of creative control in what type of questions you ask, then you're really looking at getting a PhD. And you can either do this once you get your PhD, you can either work at an academic research institution, manage your own lab, teach your own students. It's a good combination of research and ed. However, you can also go into industry, become a research scientist or a project manager, and often be in charge of your own type of project. However, it is worth noting that you can also get into government work as a lab technician, a research scientist, or as a project manager in case you want to work on more governmental projects. However, it turns out research and education aren't your only options. Another very popular choice is going out and getting a professional degree. So if you like medicine, you can go ahead and pick up your uh, medical doctorate or your doctorate in osteopathy here in town. Otherwise, another popular choice is an MD PhD in case you want to go ahead and do more research on uh, more medical topics. So this gives you a lot more opportunities if you want to work with real patients on real diseases in a more research type setting. However, there's also other classic choices, like you can go to pharmacy school or vet school in case you're interested in other sort of topics. But you don't have to stick to those classic professions. You can also go get your Juris Doctorate and go be a lawyer. And it turns out that being a lawyer with a chem background can actually be very powerful. You can either go and get big money by being a patent attorney, or you can go get small money by working in environmental consultancy. And again, there's almost an innumerable number of other paths that you can go ahead and take your chem major. So classic answers are going into industry, going into quality control and analysis, as this is a very high demand field of chemistry. There's also chemical engineering, or you can go out and work as a data analyst, not just for chemical companies. I had a colleague in grad school who went and got big money by working as a took his theoretical chemistry degree, went and got big money by working as data analyst for a financial company. But also there's some demand for sales work for people with a big background in chemistry. I also had a friend who went into materials characterization, where he spends most of his time working with X-ray spectroscopy and electron spectroscopy, characterizing materials for medical device companies. But you can also go down to St. Louis and work in a brewing company. If you really enjoy writing, you can also be hired as a technical writer, not just for things like magazines or newspapers, but also you can be writing things like product warnings for chemical products, as well as user manuals, and even just helping people write scientific papers. And the number of options goes almost as long as you can imagine. And I've had at least one friend go into each of these careers. However, there's some things that are just always an option, because if you have a chemistry degree, you have good critical thinking skills. And I had a college roommate who went on to become a pastor. So there's always options when you have a chem degree, because it means you are a good student and know what you're doing. So don't try and find yourself pigeonholed. There's always options. However, let's go ahead and focus in on those three big choices. So if you're looking at what to do after Truman, I want you to come up with a good idea of what sort of timelines you might be involved in. So for example, let's say you want to go into professional school. You want to go ahead and be a lawyer or be a doctor. It's what every parent wants. So one of the things you're going to need to be aware of is professional schools are expensive. It's very common for law and medical schools to cost well over $100,000, cost of $200,000 to $300,000 for a 4 to 5 year program is not uncommon. So you're going to need to be very aware that you're probably going to have to take out a lot of loans. However, a lot of loan companies are very happy to help finance somebody who's going to hopefully make big money afterwards. So Big investment, but often big profits, but be very aware of this. Also, you need to be aware of what your timeline's gonna look like. So it's very common that that applications for professional schools, especially med schools, are going to be due as early as June before your senior year. Once you get to law schools, those deadlines start moving more towards August. But you're going to have to be expecting to spend a portion of your junior year getting ready, getting your applications ready. And this often means that you might need to have to prepare taking your own entrance exam. So if you're looking at becoming a doctor, you're probably going to have to take an MCAT. Or if you're going to look into being a dentist, they often require the MCAT as well. If you're wanting to go into pharmacy school, they often have their own specialized test called the PCAT. And if you're looking at law school, you're looking at the LCAT. However, some of these programs require just the general GRE. And if you're looking at things like vet or dental school, the requirements can actually vary from school to school. So try and do your homework before you start your application. So spend a good portion of your junior year being aware of what requirements you're going to likely have to fill. So again, you're often going to need to take these entrance exams before your application. So this usually is going to happen sometime the spring of your junior year. So keep that in mind. And again, be very aware of what schools you're applying to because these requirements can vary from school to school. So nothing you have to think about now, but this time next year, you should be highly considering, if you're looking at professional school, what sort of tests you may need to take. Also, one of the other things you should be aware of is, depending on which entrance exam you're going to be taking, you might want to consider what classes you should have completed before you try and take these exams. So things to be aware of. And in general, you're going to want to expect to spend a large portion of your senior year doing interviews, as interviews for med school can typically go anywhere starting from October all the way into March or April. However, a lot of you might also be looking at grad school. It's a classic choice. I made it myself. So one of the big differences when you go looking at a PhD program for graduate school is that instead of having to pay $100,000 to go to graduate school, your program should actually be paid for by the work you do as a grad student, either as a researcher or as a TA. And additionally, not only should the program be free, you should actually receive some form of stipend. So depending on what school you're looking at, this can go anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000. Again, bio programs often paying a little bit less, chemical engineering programs paying a little bit more. So kind of be aware of what you're looking at. However, if you are looking at starting at a master's program, this can actually be a little bit different. A lot of master's programs will actually will cost money, but you can often make arrangements to do TA work to help try and cover the cost and even get a stipend. Likely not as large as for a PhD program, but often enough to live on. Now, if you're going to try and apply for graduate school, these applications are due a little bit later than the professional school. So typically, you're going to want to have, these are going to be due as early as October and usually as late as December, with some going all the way into January. But try and be on top of things and try and get them in as close to October, November as you possibly can. So again, this will be a large focus of your senior year. Almost all graduate schools require at least the GRE. However, some schools are starting to waive this requirement. So be very aware of what school you're applying to. It's worth noting that some schools, such as my alma mater, the University of Minnesota, require an additional subject GRE to apply to the program. For example, this is usually going to be the chemistry GRE, but if you're applying to our biochem program, this might be a bio GRE. So again, you're going to want to be very aware of what classes you're taking before trying to take these GREs to try and give you yourself the best advantage of looking good on the exam. So typically, you're going to you're not going to typically need to take the GRE until the fall of your senior year. But if you want to go ahead and leave yourself time to study, trying to do the GRE sometime in the summer between your junior and senior year is not a bad idea. However, once you get your application in, one of the nice things about most of the chemistry grad schools is they tend to have a fairly narrow range of acceptance dates, where they'll tend to send their acceptances out sometime in January, with occasional lagging acceptances going out into early February. So you have a much narrower window to expect to hear responses, which means that you can help plan accordingly. However, one of the big things is once you have your acceptance in hand, you're usually going to want to plan to take visits to all of the schools you're interested in sometime in the spring of your senior year. So this means you may be taking 2 to 6 trips all over the country to figure out what schools you want to go to. So this can be a large drain on your time your senior semester. And one of the reasons a lot of people like to plan an easier semester that year so they can enjoy a senior slide and have fun going around the country. It is worth noting that a lot of these visits are paid by graduate schools, but again, not all, and some only are covered by a limited reimbursal. It is also worth noting that this process can differ greatly if you start applying to bio or biochemistry programs, where the acceptance dates can come out much later, and sometimes you actually even need to do visits before you receive an acceptance. So again, it's worth noting that this is the general approach for most schools, but be very aware of what program you're applying to. Now, what happens if you don't want to go to a professional school or grad school? What if you actually want to join the real world? Well, at that point, you're really looking at the job market. So, as a good general piece of advice, you probably should begin your job search sometime early in your senior year. Get an idea of what's out there, but don't worry if you don't hear anything back. It's not uncommon for employers to want to hire somebody anywhere from 6 months to only 1 week ahead of starting. So a lot of places will only hire at a longer term promise date, and some will only hire on a short-term notice. So be aware that there's going to be a lot of flexibility in what a company wants. Now, one of the classic ways to go about trying to apply for a job is to go through a classic job matching service. So you have your classic Monster.com, which is more of a general service. You also have the old standard of LinkedIn. But it's worth noting that there's going to be a lot of chemistry-specific services like the one offered by ACS of Chemistry Jobs, where you're just going to be looking at more chemistry and biochemistry related jobs and not having to sort through the whole wider range of jobs that might be out there. However, it is worth noting that these services often only get you so far, and usually a much better option than these services is by trying to build a set of personal contacts, because it turns out it's often more important who you know than what you know. So when you're looking at your life after Truman, one of the things I want you to be aware of is there's a lot of different directions you can go. I mostly spent my time talking about professional school, graduate school, and industry. However, there's also a fair number of chemical-related jobs for the government, whether it's doing water quality analysis for the EPA or working at a governmental lab for the DOE. However, you can occasionally get these jobs with a bachelor's, but you can often get them with a master's or a PhD. So even if you start in one of these pools, it's always possible to end up going in between. For example, who doesn't love a lawyer with a chemistry background who decides to work for the government? So Before you go ahead and try and choose which career path you really are interested in, I want everybody to, before class, consider a couple of key questions. First, I want you to really consider, what do you like to do? Is there any topic of chemistry you really enjoy? Do you just enjoy reading? Do you enjoy working with your hands? This can really control where you might want to go. However, what you like to do isn't always what you're good at. And you tend to want, if you're going to be doing it as a career, you probably want to be good at it as well. And also see if it's possible to make a career that overlaps with your interests, whether that be cooking or perfumes, or if you just really love medical work or dogs or animals. So again, this can be a really important thing to consider. But equally as important as what you like to do, it's what do you hate to do? What don't you ever want to do or spend your whole life at doing? So let's say that you really enjoy research, but you hate sitting behind a desk. Then maybe a PhD might not be the best option. So again, try and always think about what sort of cost benefit analysis there might be in between what you want to do and what you might want to try and avoid. But one of the big things that can really help you choose a career is actually these three questions on the right. So the first of which is, how much independence do you want to have? So do you want to choose what kind of research questions you want to work on, or do you like just being given a project to play around with? This can really help you control whether you might want to go straight into working in industry or government, or whether you might want to get a PhD first, where you can actually have greater research control. Another thing is, what kind of lifestyle do you want? Do you want to work 9 to 5, or do you not mind working 80-hour work weeks? Are you okay living on an academic's budget of, say, $50,000 a year? Or do you actually want to go into industry and make real money? And if you want to make real money, you might want to actually consider getting a PhD and then going into industry. So a lot of these things can greatly control what you want to do. So I don't want to sound crass about it, but do consider what sort of paycheck and what kind of work-life balance you kind of want. But sometimes money doesn't matter. What you really want to do is have a cause. So if you really have certain issues you care about, you might want to go work for the EPA. You might want to be an environmental lawyer. Or if you just don't care, you might want to go for the money. So again, try and consider all of these options. Then once you have an idea of what career might be a good fit, then you should try and proceed with what you need to do to get there. So the big questions here are going to be, what skills do you need? What experiences do you need? So you might need some research experience or to pad a resume in order to get into the grad school or medical school you're looking for. And if you're looking at going into industry, you might want to spend some time over the next couple of years building contacts. Go out and get some internships with some chemical companies. This can be a very good place to start. You also might want to consider about trying to join a research group so you can get involved in conferences and build up real good contacts. So hopefully we'll talk about these in class and we can try and figure out what's going to be the best career or direction for everyone to proceed. Until then, take care.